Jesus gave us a story in Matthew chapter 14, this principle, this event that happened in his life and ministry. He was preaching one day and he had a large crowd of people. The Bible says there were 5,000 men there, plus the women and the children. And so as I've mentioned before, it's highly likely that there could have been 10 or 15 or 20,000 people that day gathered on that hillside to hear Jesus speak this message. And so he finishes speaking the message and he calls his 12 disciples around him and said, you know what, I think we should give them a meal before they go home. I think it would be nice for us to demonstrate some hospitality. And, when they're hungry, they've been sitting here listening to this all day. We don't want to send them home on an empty stomach. You give them something to eat. Now, can you imagine him being one of the 12 disciples? So they quickly call a committee meeting. Jesus walks away. This is now our committee meeting. Jesus just told us I think there's a better idea. And now let's pick up the story as they go back to Jesus with their better idea. You ready for this? Here's the better idea of the disciples, beginning in verse 15. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. Jesus, we had a meeting. We talked to the CFO. He looked over the accounts, and it would be a whole lot better idea if we didn't have to deal with this deal of kind of feeding everybody, because it's a mess, and it just would be a whole lot easier and simpler. Just go tell everybody to go home and get something on the way. Stop by McDonald's as they're heading back to the village, okay? Better idea, Jesus. Now, one of the things you got to love about Jesus, he loves to veto your ideas, okay? Because in reality, he always has the best idea. Notice what he says now in verse 16. Jesus replied, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. Now, by this time, they'd already frantically searched through the crowd and commandeered a little boy's lunch, because that was all they had. And so they found a little boy who had 5 loaves and 2 fish. And so that was kind of their backup plan. So we don't have anything here. They say in verse 17, we have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, they answered. Now, would you agree that's lack compared to the need? 5 loaves and 2 fish and 20,000, 10, 15, 20,000 people, 5 loaves and 2 fish. Notice what Jesus says, bring them here to me, he said. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So notice what happens. Jesus said, bring the little bit to me, give it to me, because that's the seed for the need. There's a big need here, but I got to start with something. I got to start with a seed. And so the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, that's the seed for the need. Bring it to me, and I'm going to bless it, because I always bless seed. Seed is always smaller than what it will potentially become.